Good morning, everybody here in the Town Hall, and good morning, everybody who's joining us online via Zoom. And at this point, I would like to welcome our guests and ask you to come and join me on the stage. We have journalists from Thailand, Russia, and Pakistan in the audience. Please join us. We also have, I will introduce them all to you just in a second, Teresa Ribeiro, I see here from the OSCE. Please join us, Khadijah and Mary Fitzgerald. Please take your stage and I will introduce everybody as soon as they're seated. Yeah, so our goal is to talk to the journalists and find out how they operate at home despite it all. You will hear a lot about the circumstances that they work under, and we have representatives from international organizations and funds who are trying to help support journalism where it's most under threat. And we will start with the journalists, and then I'll move over to the other guests, to the organizations. We have 90 minutes, so that's a short period of time to speak to 7 people. We also have Maria Ressler, who is joining us from Manila. She's online. I can't see her at the moment.
She's there in front of you.
Here they are. Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong screen. Hello, Maria. So we have only 90 minutes. That gives about 7 to each of you. So I said no speeches. I will do a question and answer to get to the point as quickly as possible. And then we have 30 minutes to take your questions here in the audience and also online. So if you're joining us online, please post your questions in the Q&A in the posts at Zoom. And they will be pushed on onto my phone, and I will pick a few and select a few questions from the audience online. So thanks very much for that, and I will start introducing our guests. I will start with Maria, because you're far away. Hello, Maria, again. Maria Ressler is the CEO of Rappler, a news media in the Philippines. To many of you, her struggle is well known already. Maria has been convicted of cyber libel. She's facing several charges, also including tax evasion and fraud, for her critical reports on President Duterte. Then I move over to the audience here. Next to me is Galina Timchenko. She is the founder of Medusa. That's the most influential independent Russian media. She operates from Latvia. Her claim is to cover the real Russia. And she's previously worked in Moscow, but she's been fired because of her coverage of Ukraine. And she's been recently, or her media has recently been declared a foreign agent in Russia, and she will tell us what that means. Also here with us is Pravit Rojanapruk. I hope I'm saying this correctly. He's joining us from Thailand. He's a columnist and senior staff with a publication called Khowsat English. And he is covering Thai politics and culture. He's been detained, intimidated, arrested, almost kidnapped because of his coverage of the military regime in Thailand. He's facing several charges, and he calls Thailand the junta land. Also with us is Zafar Abbas. He's joining us from Pakistan. He's the editor of one of the oldest publications there. It's called Dawn. He also knows what it's like to be under threat. He's been interrogated, arrested, attacked, you name it, and his paper is frequently facing efforts to destroy it and destroy its credibility. So hard stories on that side. And also with us, I mentioned already, is Teresa Ribeiro. She is the 5th representative on freedom of the media at the OSCE. She has a long career in politics in Portugal, also in human rights and media. And she has a lot of experience in dealing with EU institutions and member states. Welcome. Then we have Khadijah. She's been mentioned already today, Khadijah Patel. She's the head of programs at the International Fund for Public Interest Media. She's a journalist from South Africa, has worked for many international news organizations like the BBC and Al Jazeera. And she's now looking at how investors and philanthropists can help journalism. And finally, Mary Fitzgerald, welcome. She's here from the Open Society Foundation. She is a director of information of the democracy program there. She was also a journalist, as she says, a recovering newsroom leader. I thought that was funny. And she will also tell us how philanthropy can help journalism. So 7 minutes, I mentioned it already, so that means that I'm also the bad cop here on the podium, and I might have to interrupt you, so please forgive me. And yeah, let's start with the journalists. I would like to hear your stories, and I will start with Maria. She's online. That's why I take you in the audience at the beginning. Maria, I hear you wanted to come, but you couldn't. The court wouldn't let you. Tell us what situation you are in at the moment.
Nadia, first, thank you. And I wish I was there. So many old friends. So no matter how grim the world gets, we can still hopefully get together and evolve it, right? I have, in less than 2 years, and with that, thank you for so many of who have helped us, I've had 10 arrest warrants filed against me, been arrested, I'm out on bail, all of this. I'm so tired of myself in this sense. But we continue. Rappler is still here. The government tried to shut us down in January 2018. We challenged it, fought back against, I have 10 arrest warrants. Rappler had 9 cases. 2 of the cases have already been dropped in the last 3 months, and that means 7 more to go. It's a time to fight. I think it's an existential moment, and we have to, when you hear everyone's stories, take everything that we have in common and realize that journalism has never been as important as it is today.
So you are in a super difficult situation at the moment. How do you keep going? How do you keep your business alive? I understand you have very young staff, very female staff. Obviously, they are in danger doing their job. So how do you keep going at the moment?
I keep Nietzsche in mind. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And I really shouldn't say that word when we're around journalists who've been under such threat, right? But I'm lucky in the sense that I spent most of my career in international journalism. So when I was arrested repeatedly, I had help, right? We were able to take some of your attention. But let me put it this way. Rappler is a startup from a decade ago now, 2012, and we're about 100 people, 63% women. The median age is 23 years old, so we're young. But I know that whether or not I go to jail, that's for the rest of my life, right, will depend on what we do today. So we continue doing investigative journalism. That journalism has now, we've released documents that is helping fuel a Senate in corruption investigation as we speak, which is being live streamed on Rappler. We are gearing up for elections like many of the countries here. Our elections, presidential elections, are in May 2022. Whether or not we have integrity of elections is going to depend on American social media platforms, how they take out the virus of lies and hate that has infected our information ecosystem. We stay focused. We realize that our future depends on what we do now.
And do you have any support? I mean, we're here with organizations who want to help. We're here with funds who want to help. We want to discuss how civil society can help, how we can create a network to support people like you and organizations like yours. So can you tell us, have you received support in the past, and what kind of support are you looking for to improve your situation?
I have, like I said, we're lucky. There are other journalists who have had it worse, but I focus on 3 pillars: technology, our investigative journalism, our accountability journalism, and our community. And the community has far surpassed what I had even expected when we started Rappler. That community has helped in crowdfunding, legal aid. There are many groups in this room, including IPI itself, that has helped us stay alive. That's one. So community. But the other part is, we're building our own technology. Journalists have to embrace the tech, and we cannot rely on social media platforms to distribute facts, because the studies have shown that the algorithms of these social media platforms are biased against facts, and they're biased against journalists. In fact, what we see, here's a fact, are that lies laced with anger and hate spread faster and further than facts. So this is, in that sense, an existential problem for all of us around the world. I think we have to focus attention. Every time one journalist comes under attack anywhere around the world, we need to come together. And I hope that the same kind of support we've received, we can focus on every single journalist that way. That's tough.
So community is a big thing. You say you are also addressing donors. Did I understand this correctly? Where do these donors come from and how do you find them?
From the very beginning, when we began Rappler in 2012, that was when we rolled it out, right? Our elevator pitch is, we're a startup, so our elevator pitch then is that we build communities of action. Because this has to be embedded into the purpose of journalism. Why do we do what we do, right? How do we take the standards and ethics of journalism and evolve it for the present and for tomorrow? The grants have always been part of our business model. 10% from the very beginning have come from grants. And as we have come under attack, we started a crowdfunding campaign that helped our escalating costs. There was a point in time when the legal cases began where a third of our operating costs were going to legal fees, right? So I have learned that, and it's hard for journalists to ask for help, but I've learned that when it's the generosity of strangers often that have helped us. And I think one of the things we can do as a whole is to remind our audiences exactly what journalists do, why we do it, why we stand up and risk jail or risk our lives in order to keep doing what we do.
That's an important point, and I'm going to ask you maybe a naive question, but how aware is the Filipino public of your struggle and why it is important? Because President Duterte still has a lot of support.
I think you'd have to check whether or not the support is real or manufactured. Is it manufactured reality? Because what we've seen online, and this is database, right? What makes Rappler unique is that we actually have the data from Facebook, our information ecosystem in the Philippines. And what we've seen from 2016 to 2021 is that news organizations have been pushed out from the center, and the role has been usurped by propaganda pages. Propaganda has always been around for a very long time, but never given the reach that social media platforms give it today. And the networked, I'm going to call it networked gaslighting, which UNESCO used as a phrase to attack truth tellers, to attack journalists and human rights activists. So look, yes, President Duterte is ostensibly popular, but I can tell you that we are not staying alive without the support of our communities. And as we're seeing now, the Senate itself has begun a corruption investigation that is showing that the two companies that have gotten the largest government contracts are not just linked to government, have been given preferential treatment, but are also linked to China. Mm-hmm. I think you have to look at this as an information ecosystem. What happens online does not stay online. Online violence leads to real world violence. The attacks against journalists enable the real world attacks against us.
I will ask you one question that kind of leads to our next participant here, to Galina, because I think she might be in a similar situation. I was wondering, is it safe in the Philippines to say that I'm donating for Rappler?
At the beginning of Duterte's 6-year term in office, it was far tougher to say that than it is today, 5 years in, and as we get ready for presidential campaigns, right? The announcement will be in October this year. Look, I say this all the time to Filipinos. One person speaking up means that person can get hammered down. But 1,000 speaking up becomes harder, and 1,000,000 speaking up becomes impossible. So you really do get the government you deserve. Well, that's me being, look, Russian disinformation, what you're going to be talking about next, somehow hits globally, right? Because they experimented in 2014, and those experiments in 2018, using data from the US Senate that they released, we were able to find the links from the disinformation networks in the Philippines through an alt-right group in Canada to Russian disinformation. There's a global network, and we should be smarter about how we handle this.
Thank you very much for describing your situation. I will move over to Galina Timchenko here. I mentioned before that your media has been declared a foreign agent. That means that you've lost funding, as I understand. You've lost staff, because it is dangerous to say that you support your news organizations. Can you tell us how you survived? How do you keep publishing? How do you keep paying your people?
You know, we were labeled as a foreign agent at the end of the April. So we decided to close Medusa. And I go to our team and went to our team and said, guys, it's over. And they say, no, okay, we will try to fight back and we will try to survive. So we founders said, okay, let's try to do it. So what the consequences of this labeling us as a foreign agent? What does it mean, foreign agent? It's a media who is working in favor of hostile country. But nobody in Russia could say which country is hostile, who is a friend and who is an enemy. But we were put in blacklist, so they destroyed our business model. We were a commercial company, and we have planned to gain revenue more than 3 million euros this year. So they destroyed our business model because our advertisers, they are living and working inside Russia, and they just do not want to have problems with Russian government. So advertisers just took off their bookings, and we were absolutely naked. And we thought, what do we have? We have team and we have audience, more than 10 to 20 million unique users per month. So we call directly for our audience, guys, we have no revenue at all. We had no advertisers for now, but we have you. Please help us save Medusa. And now we started donation campaign, and now more than 100,000 people became our donors.
Where do they come from?
Inside Russia and from abroad. You know, 70% of our readers live inside Russia and 30% outside Russia. So they are from all over the world. And we called directly for help and said, guys, please help us save this media for you. And they answered.
Okay. You have a representative from the OSCE sitting here on the podium. What is an organization like the OECD doing to help you, or what would you expect from them? What's happening? Tell us.
The situation in Russia became worse and worse every minute. 4 months ago, we were labeled as a foreign agent, and yesterday, Russian authorities imposed new law about so-called landing of foreign IT giants. Hi, I'm Gala, and I'm IT giant. Hello, Sergey Brin. Hello, Bill Gates. I'm with you. So, according to Russian authorities, every site who has more than 500,000 unique visitors per day is IT foreign giant. So here am I. What do they want to do? They want to prohibit donation for foreign IT giants who does not comply with Russian laws. They want to mark us. When you put Medusa.io in a search engine, there will be special label. This site does not comply with Russian law. So this is criminal site, literally. And they want to prohibit donations, and they want to prohibit and to ban any advertising of this type of site. So they will cut off not only our revenue, but they want to cut off our audience from us. And this is very important. So the main solution is maybe for me, in some way try to negotiate with real IT giants, because yesterday Google and Apple representatives met with Russian authorities from upper chamber of parliament, and they promised to be as good as Russian authorities want them to. And today they just removed so-called smart vote application from Alexei Navalny from Google Store and Apple Store. And they removed all the engine search results from about Alexei Navalny, because Russian authority called them for
So
such
this is
actions.
indirect pressure,
So
not direct political
maybe
pressure.
you have any negotiations or involvement or pressure to this IT giant. You know, today Apple just decided not to allow Russians to use function, so-called personal relay. This is special function in the latest iOS system that does not allow government to track your geoposition and to track your IP address. And Apple just does not allow Russians to use this function. So they are absolutely unsafe and helpless in the face of Russian authorities and restrictions and repressions. And unfortunately, real IT giant now are helping Russian authorities in their repression campaign.
Thank you, Galina. That's a very important point. I'm curious what you will tell us about it in a second. I will move on with the journalists and then move over to you, OSCE, and the other two funds to clarify the situations that the journalists are under. Pravit from Thailand, you might have something similar to say. I mean, you've said frequently how difficult it has become since the military regime in Thailand to do your job. Can you tell us how hard it is for you at the moment? I mean, we see riots continuing. How hard is it to do your job at the moment?
Thank you, Nadja, and guten Morgen, everyone. Well, I have to make it clear that there was an election nearly 3 years ago, so technically the military regime had ceased to exist. But the man leading the Thai government at the moment is the same man who staged the coup back in 2014. So General Prayut Chan-o-cha is still in power. Though through elections and the rules governing the elections that was drafted by men and women directly or indirectly chosen by Prayut when he was still the junta leader. So it's a little easier, although just a few weeks and a few days before I accepted the invitations to be here this morning, there was a league list of enemies, a watch list of enemies of the state. All in all, 183 people have been listed, and I'm the only lucky journalist to be on the list, along with opposition leaders, students, activists who are calling for the reform of the monarchy institutions. A number of them are still in prison as we speak. So it's the situation is not as bad as in Myanmar, but you know, the regions we just heard from the Philippines, Marias have spoken. I think Southeast Asia are not doing too well, but we'll keep pushing.
And you have people sitting here with money in their pockets and money to give. How do you find each other? Can they help? Can you? Is that the kind of support you need?
Luckily or unluckily, the organizations I work for is just it is a corporate media, okay, part of a big group of Matishon and Khalsot newspaper. I believe the some foreign donors have been supporting some of the small alternatives media. Although it also comes with the cachet, like our Russian colleague here have mentioned, allegations that if you take money from some of the organizations, such as the George Soros Open Society foundations, for example, means that you are invariably regarded as an agent of the United States. So yes and no, okay? I mean, not all would want that sort of money, but there are some organizations that very much value such support. So there's no such thing as a free lunch. Since the COVID-19, we have been seeing the decline of the physical print media, and partly because no one wants to get infected touching newspapers at a cafe house or coffee house or some public areas, and it's very difficult these days to just go and buy a physical newspaper. I would say probably it might be easier to buy some drugs in Bangkok than find a newspaper kiosk to physically buy a newspaper. So social media have really, a small online media have really grown over the past year and a half, partly thanks to coronavirus. And we are still finding a ground, the ground. Just before I came last week, two citizens reporters who were Facebook living the nearly nightly protest in Bangkok, which turned almost end up with some violent clashes, have been arrested because they were not recognized to be journalists, and partly because they totally support fully support the protest movement. So there's that gray area now being discussed as to whether are these people journalists, and if not, my point is we should be more encompassing in treating press freedom, and even if you don't agree, if you think they are very partial or partisans, still, I think they have the right to free press. By the way, they were arrested for violating the COVID-19 curfew, which in Bangkok runs from 9 p.m. to 4 a.m. in the morning.
If you think of something that would help your situation and the situation of fellow journalists in Thailand, what would that be? Because we're here to discuss how donors and international organizations and journalists can work together more effectively.
Well, if you'd be kind enough to monitor the situation in the regions, and I think, to be fair, the real hotspot in Southeast Asia now is still Myanmar, and I appreciate the attention given to our neighbor in the north and west of Thailand. But again, occasional intervention, as in issuing statements or working closely with some organizations that are already present in Bangkok. For example, you have the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. Thank you for hosting this or partly funding this. They are active in Bangkok, and there are other competing, or maybe the word competing might not be right, but in this ecosystem, you have other foundations. You have the Friedrich Naumann Stiftung, and the Green, and the Heinrich Boll, and all that. From the German-speaking world, that's what you can do, but let's not repeat what others are doing. Okay, in Paris, you already have the Reporters Sans Frontières. The Reporters Without Borders are quite well known in Thailand. The annual ranking of the World Press Freedom Index is widely reported. Awards from organizations such as the Committee to Protect Journalists, which is based in New York, is helpful. I myself was a recipient back in 2017 after I was detained without charge twice. So I think you have to find a niche, but I think we also need a platform, probably on, and inevitably on social media, to keep the conversations going. And I'm not the biggest fan of Mark Zuckerberg's, but maybe Facebook might be, to set up a Facebook group, and I don't know who might run that. There might be a secretariat, and let's treat it like a cafe where people amongst the members could feel free to come and join and discuss and maybe explore things that we may be able to collaborate, or leave and maybe a thematic topics 3 times a year or quarterly. And I think that will keep and sustain the community of independent-minded journalists from around the world. And I think let's make the most out of what we have in terms of the technologies.
So that's a less formal approach to helping each other in the region. Thank you, Praveet.
Dankeschön.
And I will move over to Safar. You clearly are in a very difficult situation. The most obvious question that I can think of to ask you first is, how has the situation in the region, the takeover of the Taliban in Afghanistan, changed your situation in Pakistan and your work? Has it become more difficult?
I won't say it has become more difficult. It has already been quite difficult for decades now. The change in Afghanistan may have its effects in the long run, because what we are monitoring at the moment is a lot of Pakistani militant groups who were on the run may find refuge in Afghanistan and use that territory to strike back in the country. And they have targeted a lot of journalists in the past, and probably that may go up. Other than that, probably this change in Afghanistan might not change our way of doing journalism in a big way. Our real challenges come from inside Pakistan, not just by from the Islamic militant groups, by the government forces, by the security agencies. So we are in the country caught between the rock and a hard place. We try to question the government or the security agencies. Like many others said, we are branded as traitors, anti-state. We write about the atrocities committed by the militant groups. We become a target. And both sides continue to pressurize the media in Pakistan. But we still believe that the real responsibility of providing us protection is that of the state, is that of the government. So we continue to hold them responsible regardless of who has attacked us, who has killed us. And the situation is, we have seen a series of military takeovers in the country, lots of measures in the past where media has been curbed, censorships have been imposed. Unfortunately, things are, even after gaining so much freedom, Pakistan is a great country. After struggle, we achieved a very high level of press freedom. But once again, it is becoming problematic for the authorities. And unfortunately, the line dividing the civilian rulers and the security agencies is becoming blurred by every day. So we are kind of being run or controlled by a hybrid regime in Pakistan. And that is a very dangerous thing. So the attack on the media in Pakistan is now two-pronged from the authorities. One is by bringing or try to bring in new laws to regulate the media, to try and control the media, whether it's the newspapers, television, web-based media, or social media, to bring one umbrella law to control all of them, including provisions to vet a newspaper's performance every year and reissue them license. Luckily for us, all media organizations have got together and there's a joint action committee trying to pressurize the state that this is totally unacceptable. We have won in the past, hopefully we will win again. But the other side is, with somewhere where we have not been able to counter them, is the policy of using the social media to malign credible journalism and journalists in Pakistan. They have got money, they have got big organizations, and they are a huge level of trolls that can attack the credible journalists, media, and it really hurts. Many of you will agree that this trend that was set by former US President Donald Trump by calling credible journalists and credible media as fake news has been really owned by a lot of authoritarian regimes, a lot of dictators in the country, and a lot of aspiring dictators in the world. And they continue to attack credible journalism and credible journalists, calling them anti-state, fake news, and unless we find a solution to that, probably they may succeed.
I see Maria nodding here from Manila. And what is your, do you have an idea of what the international community or international press organizations could do to combat that? What's the kind of political pressure that could help?
You see, they can do a lot, and they have been doing a lot over a period of time. What we need to do is to continue to send messages to such governments, whether they are in Pakistan, in India, in Bangladesh, in so many other countries, in Turkey. We should continue to send the message that the world is aware of what you are doing. And the world knows that this is not acceptable, and we will continue to protest. And here we are talking about a collective voice, not money. We need money, but we don't want their money. We are financially weak, but probably we will survive, but certainly we will not require international funding. What we require is an organized movement against such new laws that are being brought in to suppress the free media, the laws or the actions that are forcing journalists to withdraw from this or leave this profession, the attacks on journalists, the killing of journalists, their abduction, their torture. Institutions or organizations like IPI and so many other international organizations, if they continue to monitor or coordinate with us to raise this voice, it will make a difference. All these regimes, no matter what they call us, they know that when these international or the voices from all over the world are raised, the donors to these countries, the other organizations of the country, get scared, get worried, and they start to negotiate with this government to improve the fundamental rights in these countries. You see, what is happening is we need to understand is that there was a phase where in Pakistan lots of journalists were killed. Say, for instance, since 2002, more than 70 journalists have been killed in Pakistan, and not a single case has been solved. So the culture of impunity to target journalists exists, whether they are people from one government or the other, whether they are from the militant groups, they know they can carry out these actions and get away with it.
Let me finally play a little bit devil's advocate here. I mean, morale hasn't been much pressure lately with populist regimes. The power of using morale has decreased. So do you think that what should be the political effort, or how could it be greater or bigger than it has been?
Yes, morale has decreased. I mean, it's an international phenomena. Ultra right-wing groups in many areas are using this nationalism card to go after free press, go after human rights organization. It is a trend. We believe that probably it will go away if we have a sustained movement to counter these forces. Whether it's a weak voice, tomorrow it may become a much bigger voice. Because the challenge for us is not just about killing of journalists. The challenge is about killing of credible journalism. And we have to understand that, and we have to unite to counter these forces in all these countries, and probably at some day we will win.
I will move over straight to Teresa Ribeiro because this is your business. You are sitting here as a representative of the OSCE, and that's exactly what you do. You try to put political pressure on institutions, on governments. Tell us how you do that. I mean, you've heard the stories here. You've heard the request, please talk to the IT giants, for instance. I mean, that's a big topic in all of the countries here. Have you been doing that? Tell us. Let us look behind the scenes.
Thank you very much, and it's really a pleasure to be here with all of you and also those that are following us online. So many topical issues that have been raised that let me try to organize a little bit what has been said and to see what can we do, at what level. At the level of the journalists, at the level of the organizations, regional and the international ones. But let me try to, in a way, organize a little bit my own speech. Of course, judicial harassment, labeling of foreign agents, which is, of course, to stigmatize journalists. Pressure on social media, conversations or pressure over the ITs that, of course, they have to respond to the expectations of their shareholders, not to the citizens, which is a problem, and it will be a problem in the future, and we have to look at it due to the dominance of the market they have. Or as you mentioned, which an extreme case, the killing of journalists. All these are, of course, to silence journalists and to silence critical voices. And the problem is, what can we do? At the level of the journalists, and this is very promising, at least for me, you are trying to organize. There is crowdfunding, and I was very touched by what you said, Maria, about the way you manage to crowdfunding in case to protect journalists and when they are under slams. Also, what Galina told us about the contribution to continue to make Medusa to continue to do their work. All this is very important, of course. So at the level of journalists, great, wonderful. What can we do at the level of governments, at the level of the international or regional organizations, which is the case of OSCE? And this is, of course, much more complicated. We have quite a lot of commitments at all levels, international levels, United Nations, OSCE, on media freedom, on freedom of expression. So there is no lack of commitments. The problem is the implementation. And the problem of enforcing implementation is really there. What kind of mechanisms do we have at international level to enforce the states to really comply with the commitments? And this is, of course, very fragile, very, very fragile. And maybe this is something in which we should concentrate and we should focus on, because we need really to try to push in a sense of having international mechanisms to allow us to fully to follow up the implementation.
So how do you do that?
And for that, what I see also is that there are some even the international organizations or regional organizations, we just listen to Vera Shurova, that at the level of the EU, they are now trying to step in the field of legal harassment, judicial harassment, protecting independence of the media. But then again, it's one organization. So what we need is to create a kind of network of organizations converging in their efforts, as you should at the level of journalists, because this is a problem. The journalists, they have different organizations. It's good, it's fantastic, but how to reinforce this network? How to better organize among yourselves? And this is your work. And it will be really a very important one in the future. So at the same time, I also would like to say something about the general situation on media freedom. Is of course worsening, is under threat, definitely. In the last 10 years, it's worse than it was 10 years ago. It clearly worsened, that's clear. And I do remember one interesting interview I watched with Tony Blair, and he was telling, some years ago, 15 years ago, when I talked with the leaders, the authoritarian leaders, they told me, yes, we are doing all the efforts, we are doing our best, but we need time, etc. Nowadays, they say, no, I don't care. And they don't care. So they really don't care. That's the big problem. So that's the reason why it's so difficult to have them on board at the political level. Mm-hmm. So this is the situation. At the same time, once again, and just to zoom a little bit, we have the problem of the wave of disinformation, of fake news, that it's really impacting the safety of journalists, as you rightly mentioned, because it really shows a distrust that journalists only say lies, only fake news, and what we see nowadays, they are attacked not only by the authorities, but also by the public in general. And this is, in a way, a new problem. Mm-hmm. So we have so many dynamics, so contradictory dynamics, that we really need to unite efforts and to see what can we do to push the creation of mechanisms at international level to monitor the implementation of the commitments of the countries.
Thank you very much. I understand more networking, more cooperation is needed. That's what we are here for. And I will pass over to Khadijah, to you. You are now representing a fund that is fairly new, and the International Fund for Public Interest Media, that is, and you have the backing of philanthropists, people with money who want to help. Tell us how you are going about your job. How do you find projects? What kind of projects do you want to fund, and what are the conditions?
Thanks very much. Yeah, it's sobering listening to people like Zafar, Maria, a colleague from Thailand. The situation is very, very urgent, and the fund that I'm working for is brand new, as you pointed out. Our secretariat was only launched in February, but it comes on the back of about 3 years of deep consultation and work and research in putting this together. So right now, I don't have any money to give anybody, unfortunately. But we are working very hard to actually establish the fund. We are reasonably confident of launching within the first half of next year. And because of the way that we are approaching fundraising, we are particularly focusing on governments that have development aid budgets. And we're going to them and asking them to start rethinking their priorities, and as a commitment to the freedom of the press around the world, to think about how they can devote at least 1% of development aid budgets to media. We believe that even if we get those budgets up to 0.5% around the world, it is a substantial increase. Obviously, we're not going to get there overnight. We see this as a, at least a 10-year plan, but we hope to get to that 1% very, within these 10 years. But we're starting by going to governments. We're asking them to start making these commitments, to start looking at their budgets. We are particularly asking everybody that we approach not to redirect existing media funding to us, but rather to look for new funding and to direct new funding to us. So that's really important. The urgency of the moment dictates that we search deep within us as a community of people around the world to actually ensure the viability of media. So on top of that, we also go approaching the tech companies and, of course, philanthropy. So altogether, we hope to put this fund together. We want to launch with at least $100 million. And the reason, it sounds ambitious, but the reason that we believe that it has to be a substantial amount is that we have to seek a step change. We have to see something significant, and we believe that another million here or 500,000 here is not actually going to make a significant difference to the ecosystem around the world. Therefore, this is an ambitious project, but importantly, it is a multilateral approach. Our colleague over here has emphasized this, and I think that the International Fund for Public Interest Media is something that Maria, who's on our advisory board, has labeled, it is an opportunity. It is a 1948 moment. It is an opportunity for us as a community, as a global community, to come together and cement the idea of the media as a public good. And this is just the beginning. This is step one. The fund that I represent, the fund that we're trying to put together, is not meant to be around forever. It's meant to just ensure that the media exists, because what we're seeing around the world in sub-Saharan Africa, where I come from, we're just seeing journalists being dropped out of newsrooms. Newsrooms cannot afford to keep as many journalists as they did a year ago or 2 years ago. And with that, we're also seeing promising startups just disappearing off the radar. We need to ensure that there is a media for us to support.
And how do you find those projects? I mean, you're talking about small-scale newsrooms that are struggling. How would they even know that you exist? How would you find each other?
Yeah, so that's my job. The way that we envision the fund to be implemented is, for us, we're going to be building regional centers. And within those regional centers, we will have in-country strategies, because we particularly understand, and my experience on the other side of the table, my frustration sometimes with media development efforts is, a kind of cookie-cutter approach. And we particularly are fighting against that. We want to ensure that we have bespoke strategies, because what's true for South Africa is certainly it's not true for Pakistan. And what will work in South Africa and what the need is in South Africa is certainly not what's needed in Pakistan, and we cannot enforce that. We're also aware of the potential to distort markets. So we have to be very, very responsible with the level of investment that we make in each country. So the answer is that it will be a consultative process, that I am particularly passionate about building the fund in such a way that it is from the bottom up, that the needs on the ground dictate how the fund will eventually be implemented. I think that it's very, very important, with due respect to colleagues in Brussels and DC, that this fund is not a political mechanism, and it's not something to implement the political ambitions of people in DC or London or Brussels or elsewhere, but rather is a means for us to support journalists on the ground.
Thank you very much. That's the cue for Maria, who is working for a fund that's been in the business for a long time. Tell us how your fund, the OSF, is helping journalists in need at the moment. How do you find your projects? How do you choose who to fund, and how do you find the people that need you?
Well, I think I'm going to speak as a recovering newsroom leader, to use the phrase that you borrowed earlier. I mean, I've been in the job for about 5 minutes, so I really am going to respond more as a journalist and I see myself as an activist for journalism. And I think what we heard here, what's very clear, right, is there are large parts of the world where open society cannot work and cannot fund, and organizations that, if they take their money, become bigger targets and often can't take our money. So I think this is a much bigger question than just funding and giving out money, although that is hugely important, and we do fund fantastic organizations all over the world, and we particularly fund experiments in new models of financing, of revenue, of business, because we understand that there's a crisis of the journalism business model. If you fund an organization, let's say in South Africa, that comes up with a model, it can be applied or adapted elsewhere. And that's part of fixing this, right? The resilience and the sustainability that organizations need involve being very creative about their business models, as we've heard from those who've crowdfunded in moments of crisis. But also, I kind of want to lift up the fact that we had a conversation yesterday amongst some of us on the round table about sustainable financing of journalism. And we have to recognize that those two goals are often in direct competition with each other. Right? If you have great impact as a journalist or as a media organization, they will come after you. They will hurt your revenue. They will come at you with trumped up tax and libel charges. They will come after you because you don't have building safety regulations in place. They'll come after you for anything. So while there is rightly a focus amongst donors and philanthropists on sustainability of media, and we absolutely can and should continue funding experiments, we also have to recognize that impact and, quote, sustainability often are in direct competition. And that some of the journalists and organizations in some of the most repressive parts of the world that have impact are going to be targets, and their sustainability, their bottom line, will be hit and will be hurt, and we have to stand with them in those moments. But I wanted to pick up Zafar's point about speaking with a collective voice, and I think that's something actually as a global community of journalists we aren't doing perhaps as well as we could. So I have this particular bugbear. I think that Google and Facebook should not be allowed to advertise on any media, anywhere. Every time I listen to the New York Times podcast and I hear Facebook telling us about all the great things they're doing for journalism, it makes me want to scream. Because we need to show solidarity, right? We need to, as a global community of journalists, and I'm sorry, I'm going to call out the New York Times here because they're okay, they're doing all right. We need to stand up and say, until you actually take the steps that are needed to protect journalists, to protect our colleagues all around the world, we are not going to allow you airtime. We are not going to allow you to spread your misinformation about what you're doing. And that has to be that has to be a line we draw in the sand. So that's my particular bugbear. I also think we have to learn from some of their tactics. We have to launch an avalanche of lawsuits the way that they do against journalists and organizations that they're threatening. We have to double down. We have to be front-footed as well. So our colleague here was talking about how it's not quite as bad in Thailand as it is in Myanmar. Let's not let it get that bad. Organizations like the CPJ and RSF do fantastic work in terms of raising the profile of journalists who are under attack and doing wonderful advocacy, and they need our support and will continue to get it. But I also think that could we be more creative and front-footed when in situations where it's not as bad as Myanmar, right? What are the kind of advocacy and PR and communication strategies that we can deploy to hold the line and to really tell the story about how journalism serves communities? And then the final point is, I suppose, and this is absolute to borrow from Maria here, how can we deploy our funding and our networks and our solidarity as journalists to build different communities of action? Yes, we could set up another Facebook group, but what about doing something else? What about building new technology that doesn't rely on these massive, unaccountable big tech platforms? What about building other networks and communities of action? So that's something I'm very interested in and going to be thinking about more in this job as well.
I think that's an important point because that also comes in with what you said earlier, Maria, is that we need to build communities and we need to build public pressure from the societies within who then exert pressure on their political systems. Organizations and money is great, but there also needs to be a grassroots movement, and that's why I ask you where is the Filipino population of your struggle and why it is important to them and their freedom. I think that's a question that can be asked in every country because people often don't understand the power of media and the importance of a free media. It takes a lot of education, even in a country like Austria. So I think that's a very important point. Thank you, everybody, for being so disciplined. You all kept your 7 minutes, and we've been talking for an hour. Sorry, Galina, yeah, sure, go ahead.
May I add a little bit? I want to put a complaint. Guys, when I want to apply for grant, every time, every organization said, guys, where will you be in 3 years? I do not know where we will be in 3 days, guys. Please be as flexible as possible. Thank you.
You made your point. Another important question, and I will open the ground now for questions. And to kick off, I will ask one that's burning, in my hand, and then I'll open up for you. Isn't there a problem also with philanthropic funding? As a journalist, my first instinct is to have a red lamp here saying, be careful, what's the political agenda, why do they fund this, who's behind it, and what happens when they're done, So they funded a thing for 3-5 years, and then what happens? How sustainable is it? So I would like to ask, you're all nodding, so who wants to reply to this?
I'll take that. I think you're exactly right, and I think that's the problem with a lot of existing modes of media development. And in my country, in South Africa, one of the difficulties many small organizations are having right now is that donors particularly have short-term objectives, and with the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of donors very quickly shifted their objectives, leaving many organizations completely stranded, actually. And that's something that's very, very difficult for newsrooms, for news organizations to plan for. And this is why, what we're hoping to do with the International Fund, I know I'm sounding like an advertorial, I promise, please hold me accountable, is to work against that, to ensure that there is a consistent level of funding over a period of time, because I've been on the other side of the table. Like I said, I've also sit on boards where we've been struggling with exactly this, with the short-term nature of, and the short-term objectives of funders. And you're right as well that, let's be quite clear, nobody, funds anybody for rainbows and puppies and unicorns. Everybody has, some kind of objective. And this is why we've always got to be very, very careful about where we take money from, but also be very transparent, I believe. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's clear. As a journalist, like Miriam, also a recovering newsroom leader, I think that I'll spend the rest of my life, actually, in recovery. As a journalist, I was very, very clear about researching organizations that that we may be taking money from, trying to understand who else they fund, understanding what their objectives are and what they've done elsewhere and what their requirements are of us, and whether we're comfortable with that. And I think that it's important for us also to be transparent within newsrooms about that, because one of the most surprising things I've found in my career is that often newsrooms themselves are not democratic spaces. And that's something that, that I want to challenge us to be better at.
That's interesting. Can you tell us why you say that?
I think that it's obvious in some ways that we need more transparency in newsroom decisions. We need editors to be accountable as well in their spaces to be answerable. And it is difficult, but I think that there is often a lack of transparency and accountability, and also just a lack of space even for even the most junior person in your newsroom actually to ask questions of the most senior leadership. I think that is a very important space for us to cultivate. And I think that a lot of the discussion that's come out in the last 18 months around Black Lives Matter and the need for more diversity in newsrooms actually also feeds into this principle, and that we need to also assess the culture of newsrooms. So I think and this extends then to being open about funding, taking questions within the newsroom about, because what does this mean for a journalist in the field if we are taking funding from OSF? Do journalists feel comfortable? Are they comfortable being labeled Soros agents? What does this actually mean? How do we prepare journalists as well, to withstand that criticism and those labels and that harassment that is almost inevitable to come? So yes, I think this is why I think that building an international organization, and the way around it, I believe, is to have a multiplicity of funders, to ensure that there is a diversity of funders, that you're transparent, and this is why I'm hoping that with a multilateral mechanism like the International Fund, where we have several donors, that we are able to insulate both grantees from the idea of being American agents or French agents or or whatever it is, but we'll also hopefully build insulation between the funders, so that the funders also are not accused of trying to meddle in Russia, for example.
Thank you very much. I want to make sure that people have the opportunity to ask questions, but I see so far you wanted to say something briefly?
I just wanted to pick on what Mary suggested towards the end, that we have to come up with different strategies to reinvent the wheel to how to deal with the situation. But for me, I can speak for myself. I've been there for the last 41 years in this profession, and it will be difficult for somebody like me to change, probably somebody younger with more energy who will step into my place and may do that. But there are people like Maria Ressa. I mean, she and I probably started at the same time. She used to report for the CNN. I used to work for the BBC at the time. Then we went our own ways, and she reinvented the wheel. Look at Rappler, the way Rappler has changed the way journalism should be done. So there are people who can do all those things. And Mary, you're absolutely right. Probably we'll have to constantly think about how to counter these forces of repression, and probably we will find a solution.
Thank you very much. I want to take the first question from the floor. The gentleman over there is also already at the microphone. Could you please just say who you are and who you are addressing the question to?
My name is Mahfouz Anam. I am an editor from Bangladesh. I have been a journalist for 50 years. I've started in 1972, so I am perhaps among the oldest in this room. May I bring this issue of funding of journalism? I think Khadijah is my new chair in the IPI board. I say it with all the respect to your intentions, for your good wishes, your sympathy for journalism and all that. But I think international funding can be something like the medicine being worse than the disease. And I say it with tremendous seriousness. What has been the developmental experience since the Second World War? Khadijah, you did say that this is the 1948 moment. I really don't understand what you meant by it, but if you mean the end of the Second World War, it is also the beginning of the Cold War. And the global journalism has been tremendously affected by this. We are still trying to recover from the ideological orientations of the Cold War. Now, to the best of my knowledge, and I come from a country which has received a lot of development fund over the years, the development experience has been a bad one. It has strengthened exploitation. Africa is a very good country that after so many decades of development aid, more money comes out of Africa to the global centers, financial centers, than it goes back. Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, you name it, the development experience has been bad. And throughout that development experience, we heard words like bottom up, cookie cutter is not the answer, we have to localize, we have to understand the sentiment of the people. And now it is 70
I'm sorry,
years.
sir. We hear your point, and
Yes, I'm making a point.
Okay.
It is very fundamental. You see, I mean, I've come all the way from Bangladesh to participate. If you give me just 3-4 minutes, it's not fair. I would like to just suggest that issue of development funding to journalism should be approached with tremendous care, because journalism's basis is public credibility. Public credibility is strengthened when the financial things are transparent. A newspaper of credibility, a news portal of credibility will not have the public confidence if it is funded from abroad, however transparent, however well-meant, however accountable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You've made a very important point, and I will pass it on to Khadijah and say, what do you learn from the past mistakes in order not to repeat them?
I agree with everything you say, Mahfouz. I agree with everything you say. But I refuse to believe that we cannot be better. I insist that we have to be better. I recognize the deficiencies and the weaknesses of existing modes of media development. I recognize the way that development aid has been used in actually a very damaging way in media development. I was shocked a couple of weeks ago. I was reviewing a CV actually, and someone, listing his previous project said that he had handled a £250 million grant for media development in South Sudan. To make you understand, there is no media in South Sudan, right? I'm not sure where that £250 million went. And as an African, I can tell you that £250 million could go a very, very long way to fixing the media in the whole continent. So I am studying all of these experiences. I'm particularly speaking to people across the world. The fund doesn't exist right now, right? And much of my work is actually to shape how the fund will eventually be implemented. And I hear you, and I hear that this has all been said before, and I hear your particular caution, which I think is really important, about a new kind of Cold War, which I think that we are entering with China. But I am resolved to believe that we can be better.
Pravid, you have a lot of experience. Tell us.
Well, just trying to get into this conversation and give a very concrete example in Thailand. One of the so-called alternative online news media called prachathai.com, I think they've been, over the past many years, receiving funding from OSF. And of course, they've been accused of being a Soros or agents of Americans' interests. But on one issue that they have been very consistent, and I think if we look at the ecosystem of the landscape of the press or the social or the of the media, we could see that these organizations have been very persistent over the years in pushing for greater press freedom when it comes to reporting about the Thai monarchy. For those who may not know, in Thailand we have this law called the Lèse Majesté law, where defaming or criticizing, in effect, the king or the queen could lead to a maximum imprisonment term of 15 years. So it is a clear impediment for the press freedom in Thailand, for the press in Thailand to report about the monarchy, who spends a lot of time in the German-speaking part of Bavaria, I think in Munich. But the point is, without Prasha Thai spearheading the push for greater press freedom in this field and the subsequent burgeoning of the student-led monarchy reform movement, that movement would have almost been, impossible. Part of the discussions was made by them. I'm a pro bono, or used to be a pro bono columnist for Prasha Thai. So I'm not getting money from Soros, but that's one of the merits. Okay, of course, in Prasha Thai, such an organization will have to deal with its own future. They're trying and to locally raise funding as well. But I say there are time and places where a very fine-tuned funding could make a difference. And as we speak, the younger generations want transparency, want the ability to be able to take the monarchy into account. And partly the press played the role, and maybe George Soros played the role as well.
Okay, thank you very much. I will look at this part of the room because I'm always facing that way. I apologize. Is any other questions from the audience that you would like to ask? Could you step forward to the microphone? If not, Teresa, you wanted to say something early on?
Yes, but there is a question from
where?
the floor.
I didn't see. I'm sorry, please. You have to walk towards the microphone.
My question is to Madame Ribeiro. My name is Mirjana Tomic. I work for 2 media organizations in Vienna. My question is very simple. You have mentioned that politicians, not to say authoritarian politicians, before used to say, we should do something about press freedom. Now they say, we don't care. Who or what gives them this strength and confidence to say, we don't care? Thanks.
This is really a good question. No, it means that really the space and the importance of the media is really declining, and also for the citizens, and that's the problem. How shall we restore the trust of the citizens on the media? And this is the big question. Our colleague from Bangladesh, you put your finger in a very, very topical issue, which is media sustainability. Mary also raised the issue and linked it to credibility. One of the problems also of distrust on media is the impact on media sustainability. Because, if people simply say, why should I buy a newspaper or pay for information that is lying, it's only fake news? So this has a direct impact. But it's not only this, it's also, of course, the problem that we need to look at business models of the media today. And it's of course very romantic. I'm sorry, it's very much my position to think about international funds, but I'm quite skeptical about it, to tell you the truth. And what we need is a discussion on the possible business models for the media. We need to think about it, because this is what also allows us to have a serious conversation with the governments regarding the dominant position of the IT giants.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to take a question from our online audience. I have it here on my phone. It's a question to you, Teresa, actually. One country that we haven't focused on is Belarus. And what concrete efforts has the OECD taken to engage with the authorities there? And what have you done to help the journalists?
We have done a lot. We have tried since day one that I land at the OSCE to engage with the authorities. Unfortunately, we never had any answer from their side, any openness, nothing, only a wall of silence. Of course, then we tried to outcry all the cases that and the dire situation we have in Belarus.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We'll take another question. It's for Khadijah and Maria. You both work with young journalists, and what do you think about the future of journalism education in your countries?
Perhaps Maria can take it first.
Maria, we can't hear you. We see that you're talking, but we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
No, you're back. Thank you.
Yes, excellent. I think this is one of the reasons why we work very closely with the universities now, because the transition, which had to happen first in newsrooms, also needs to happen in the academe. Journalists now have to worry not just about producing excellent content, it's the form and the substance, and then they have to worry about distribution. And the other thing that we need to train are the newsroom managers who can create, who can understand the technology, who can understand networking, communities of action. There's a whole new, by combining all these different verticals that used to be separate before, including, what disinformation networks have done, which is to take a marketing funnel and exploit the weaknesses of social media platforms. A newsroom manager needs to know this. A journalist needs to know this. Then finally, the last part is, what do you do when you're under attack? Because you're inevitably going to come under attack, and you're going to have to figure that out as well. And as we learn it, the journalists, it needs to go to the younger journalists. But here's the fun part for them. They will be taking part in creating what, journalism, what is so critical for democracy to succeed. They're going to be helping create that now.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions from the audience here? I see a gentleman raising his hand. Two gentlemen, actually. You go first, please.
Good morning. My question is, with the advent of the new media, there's no clarity anymore about who a journalist really is. For instance, somebody may be expected to have gone to journalism school. He knows about what the ethics are, what the laws of journalism are. But in this day, you just find somebody setting up a platform and calling himself or herself a journalist. And then in the process, whatever they report, whatever they say, is tainted with all sorts of bias without any respect for media ethics and law. So the question comes, who is a journalist, really? And the issue of those online journalists not giving any respect, not having any regard for law and ethics, is having negative impact on professional journalists.
So you're saying
Exactly.
how you pick the right ones, right?
Exactly.
It's a very important point you're making. Can you tell us who you are, please? Introduce yourself.
My name is Rafiu Ajakai. I'm from Nigeria.
Thank you very much. Is there a question you want to put to the audience here? So how do you find the right ones, right? I mean, it's easy to, if anybody can be a journalist, then how do you pick the right ones to work with you? Is there anybody here on the panel that wants to reply to this?
I can give a really glib, quick answer if you want. Journalism is news that other people don't want you to print or post online or whatever it is now, and it's also accurate and fact-based. And I'm skeptical of a lot of journalism training programs. I don't think you need one of those. I think you need good newsroom experience and you need to be doing stories that other people are trying to hide, and those stories need to be accurate and fact-based.
But of course, it can be difficult when you're hiring young people. You don't know how well they're trained and what they know.
Well, I think training is learning on the job. I mean, there is no industry where you need to learn more on the job than being a journalist, and that's how you learn. You can't really learn it in school.
Thank you. There was another question. Please tell us who you are.
Sure. My name is Samir Padania. For the first half of this year, I served as the lead rapporteur for the Forum on Information and Democracy on the sustainability of journalism. And in June, we issued a global report calling for a new deal for journalism. That were, and there are various things within that, primarily asking governments to spend 0.1 of GDP on public interest media, asking for 1% of ODA to be directed towards media, and that sort of stuff. But within and I'm speaking in an independent capacity. I'm not affiliated with the Forum. I'm an independent rapporteur. My question is about a piece of the research that came through from lots of different angles, which was how do you actually bring pressure to bear in countries that are, on the one hand, to all intents and purposes, they look like they're kind of okay, they're on a trajectory towards press freedom, they're sort of respecting rights, but in reality they're sort of tacitly undermining things and then frustrating, not making things easier. And what are the strategy and tactics for that middle layer of countries? We've talked a lot, Belarus is a very clear case. You ask, they don't respond, nothing happens. But in many other countries, some of which are obviously represented on the panel, there are points of pressure. And so I'm interested, what do you think, points of pressure that aren't about press freedom, that aren't about media freedom, but that might have a sort of ripple or cascade effect onto press freedom and media freedom might be? And briefly, the things that came through, for example, in Southeast Europe, Russia, we were told, fiscal integrity rules, transparency rules, beneficial ownership, these sorts of things that are about trade, investment, economy, are one of the few places where governments are sensitive, if they aren't sensitive on issues of press freedom or they're negligent. So that's my question. What do you think are viable other things that aren't about the press freedom thing, the broader coalition that Mary talked about?
Who wants to take that question in the audience?
I can. I can. But yes, this is a very good question indeed. What can we do? What can you do for this kind of countries when we can see a certain development, at least a certain engagement towards media freedom and press freedom, but at the same time we have quite a lot of obstacles. And this is a very good question for someone in my position at EOSCE, because we have such a wide membership, such a different, with very, very different situation regarding media. And for that, I have to say that we need to use different approaches, definitely. Silent diplomacy is one of them. We need to try to engage the participating states. And when the participating states are really engaged, even if they suffer, if they have, of course, a lot of difficulties and there are many, many things to criticize, but at least you see a kind of an engagement. And this is very positive. And then we can, in a way, take advantage of this kind of dynamic. And of course, then we have those that really will never step in. That's clear. And this requires another kind of strategy, which is much more like the situation in Belarus here. That is an extreme one, but it's now to be much more vocal. So we need to really modulate the way we approach the participating states, because my first obligation, according to my mandate, is to assist the participating states in complying with their commitments on media freedom and freedom of expression. And I have to modulate my way of of doing it, of performing my mandate.
I'm sorry, you have the diplomatic role here, and I see an activist sitting next to you nodding.
Yes.
Yeah, you, with your old activist hat on.
Well, yeah, I was actually going to come back to Belarus because I live in London. I live in the city of London, which is this global financial center of the world. It aids, abets, and profits from crime and oppression everywhere. Last year, my old job as editor-in-chief of Open Democracy, last year the Belarusian regime was able to raise 1.25 billion on the London Stock Exchange in a debt issuance, and many of the large banks involved have sustainable and ethical goals and mandates and talk about how they do sustainable and ethical investments only. And it's just, we need to go after them. That should never have happened. That should never have been allowed. Belarus already had an appalling human rights record. And I do think that when we think about advocacy closer to home and hitting people's organizations, regimes' bottom lines in ways that actually we can do in our own backyard, we can be very effective.
Thank you very much. We've talked for an hour and a half already, so thank you very much for your participation. To sum up a few points, money is great, but look where it's coming from, and to sum it up very briefly. And we also talked a lot about the importance about building communities and bottom-up movements. So thank you very much, and hopefully we will also contribute to build a network between journalists, organizations, and funds so that you can better help each other. And I want to close the talk here and want to thank you all for your interest and for staying with us online. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.